Hey guys, tonight we are strapping ourselves in, metaphorically speaking, for a very, very long trip. We're going to try and follow in the wake of a Viking merchant, a Russ trader, more accurately, as they embark on one of history's most epic, and frankly, exhausting, journeys, down the Volga River route, deep into the heart of Eastern Europe and beyond. Imagine yourself standing on the deck of a sturdy, clinker-built ship, the crisp northern air filling your lungs, the smell of wood, tar, and probably unwashed shipmates heavy around you. You're not going west to raid monasteries this time, oh no. You're turning east, towards the rising sun, towards rivers that stretch further than you can possibly imagine, towards lands filled with strange peoples, incredible riches, and dangers you probably won't survive. This isn't a quick raid, this is a commitment. A commitment to months, maybe even a year or more, away from home, battling currents, portages, and potentially unfriendly faces, all for the glint of silver and the promise of exotic goods. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, if you're listening live or posting later, drop a comment with where you are in the world right now and what time it is. It's always wild to see who's tuning in for a dose of sleepy history. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand there, feeling the gentle swell of the water beneath your feet. This isn't the open ocean, not yet, but it's the start. Your home harbor is receding behind you, the familiar shapes of the longhouses and the sound of the blacksmith's hammer fading into the distance. You've traded raiding for trading, the axe for the scales, at least for this trip. The thrill of battle is replaced by the anxiety of the market, the risk of a sword cut by the risk of a bad deal, or a sunken ship. Why would anyone choose this? Silver, mostly. The Arab caliphates and the Byzantine Empire were minting vast quantities of silver coins, dirhams and milliaresia, and these coins were highly prized back home, melted down for jewelry, hoards, and status symbols. The fastest way to get your hands on that sweet silver wasn't always through raiding. Often, it was through offering something equally valuable that the South wanted. And what did the South want? Furs, slaves, honey, wax, and iron. Lots and lots of furs. From the deep forests of the north came the pelts of sable, ermine, fox, and squirrel, soft and luxurious, perfect for cloaks and linings for the wealthy elites down south. And the rivers were the highways. Your ship, a nar, is different from the longships you might imagine. It's broader in the beam, deeper, built for cargo, not just speed and carrying warriors. It's got a single mast, a big square sail, and it can carry a decent amount of weight. You've spent weeks getting it ready. Checking the planks, caulking the seams with tarred moss or animal hair, a truly glamorous job. Let me tell you, the smell alone could put you to sleep, which I guess is the point tonight. You've loaded provisions, dried fish, hardtack, cured meat, water barrels, maybe some ale or mead if you're feeling fancy. But mostly, you've loaded your trade goods. Bales of furs, maybe a few iron ingots, perhaps some amber or walrus ivory if you're lucky enough to have acquired it. You check the ropes, the sail, the rudder. Everything has to be perfect. Break down here, miles from anywhere, and you're in serious trouble. The crew is a mix. Some are experienced traders like yourself, others are green hands learning the ropes, literally. There might be a few warriors along, not for raiding, but for defense. The rivers aren't always safe, as you'll soon find out. Communication is basic. Hand signals, shouts, maybe a few shared words if you're lucky enough to have picked up a phrase or two from previous trips or interactions. You're not a huge fleet, maybe just your ship, or perhaps 2 or 3 traveling together for safety. The open sea isn't the main event, it's just the watery road to the river systems. You push off from the shore, the sail catching the wind, the ship gliding forward. The familiar coastline slowly begins to change. The sounds of the harbor fade, replaced by the creak of the ship's timbers, the flap of the sail, the sigh of the wind, and the constant, rhythmic slosh of water against the hull. It's a monotonous sound, really, perfect for drifting off. Day 1 is always full of anticipation, maybe a little bit of dread. You know what you're leaving behind. but you only have a vague idea of what lies ahead. Maps aren't really a thing in the way we know them. You rely on experience, on the knowledge passed down through generations of traders, on the word of those who have gone before, often embellished or just plain wrong. It's a journey into the semi-known, which is arguably more anxiety-inducing than the totally unknown. Your immediate goal is to cross the Baltic Sea, or the Eastern Sea, as you might call it, and reach the Gulf of Finland. From there, you'll need to find the mouth of the Neva River, a crucial gateway. This first leg isn't particularly exciting, it's just sailing. You watch the waves, the clouds, the distant shorelines. You take turns at the steering oar. You eat the same dried food. You try to stay dry and warm. It's less epic adventure, more maritime commute. A really long, really cold, really damp maritime commute. Think of it as the historical equivalent of a long-haul truck driver, but with significantly worse heating and the constant threat of pirates or just, sinking. One of the fascinating things about the people undertaking these journeys, the Russ or Varangians, as they were known in the East, is their adaptability. They weren't just raiders, they were keen observers and learners. They picked up languages, customs, and trading practices surprisingly quickly. A mainstream historical fact is that these Norse merchants established key trading settlements, and even political entities along these eastern river routes, most famously the network that would eventually become Kievan Rus. These weren't just temporary camps. They became permanent centers of power and commerce, blending Norse leadership with local Slavic and Finnic populations. It wasn't always peaceful, of course, but the economic incentive was a powerful driver for coexistence, or at least, mutually beneficial exploitation. A quirky tidbit about these early river travelers? They weren't exactly known for their hygiene standards by southern standards. Arab accounts of the Rus describe them as being rather robustly scented. One chronicler, Ibn Fadlan, who met some Rus on the Volga, wrote quite vividly, and critically, about their communal washing habits, which involved everyone using the same basin of water, blowing their noses into it, and generally creating what he considered a rather disgusting scene. So, while you're imagining the romance of the open water, maybe also imagine the distinct aroma of a dozen unwashed Vikings cooped up together for weeks. Adds a certain historical authenticity, doesn't it? As you sail, you might ponder the very nature of the people you are. Are you Norse? Are you Rus? Are you something in between? Historians still argue whether the term Rus initially referred specifically to people of Scandinavian origin who operated in Eastern Europe, or if it quickly came to encompass the mixed Slavic and Finnic populations who came under their influence, or joined their trading ventures. It's a debate that goes right to the heart of the origins of what would become Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. Were the founders outsiders, or did they emerge from the local populations? The answer, like the journey itself, is likely complex and involves a lot of mixing and changing identities along the way. You, on this ship, are part of that complicated picture, a Norseman perhaps, but one whose world is rapidly expanding and integrating with the vast eastern landscape. The wind fills the sail, pushing you forward, leaving the known world behind. The endless water stretches ahead, a flat, gray expanse under a pale sky, the first stage of a journey that will take you across half a continent. You settle in for the long, slow haul. The Baltic Sea stretches out, vast and gray under a sky that seems perpetually overcast. It's cold, damp work. The wind might be fair, pushing you along, or it might be foul, forcing you to tack back and forth, making agonizingly slow progress. The ship groans and creaks with the movement of the waves, a constant lullaby of stress on the timbers. You're always checking the rigging, watching the sail, keeping an eye on the horizon for any sign of trouble, whether brewing, or perhaps the distinctive shape of another ship that might not be friendly. This initial stretch is about patience and seamanship. You're relying on the skills you learned growing up by the sea, the feel of the wind, the look of the waves, the way the ship responds to the steering oar. It's repetitive, mind-numbing work sometimes, perfect for letting your thoughts drift, or perhaps for letting sleep claim you. Days blur into nights. The sun, when it appears, hangs low in the sky. The smell of the sea is everywhere. mixed with the less appealing scent of damp wool and unwashed bodies you encountered in the last section. You eat your dried fish, chew your hardtack, wash it down with water that tastes increasingly stale. Sleep is snatched in short bursts, huddled under furs or blankets, the deck rising and falling beneath you. There's no luxury here, just the raw reality of travel in the 9th or 10th century. Think of it as extreme camping, but the tent is constantly moving and occasionally tries to sink. Your destination on this leg is the eastern end of the Gulf of Finland, searching for the mouth of the Neva River. It's not a prominent landmark, just a break in the coastline, easily missed if you're not careful or if the weather is poor. Finding it requires local knowledge or a bit of luck. You're looking for the point where the vast freshwater flow from inland finally meets the slightly salty tang of the Baltic. As you get closer, the water might change color slightly, becoming murkier, carrying the silt of the land it has traversed. Entering the Neva is a relief. The open sea is behind you, at least for now. The river current is against you, of course, because nothing about this journey is easy. You might have to lower the sail and rely on oars, or even tow the ship from the banks if the wind is completely absent or coming from the wrong direction. This is where the nature of the journey really begins to change. You're no longer sailing on a wide open expanse. You're navigating a waterway bordered by trees and land. The sounds change, the wind in the trees, the calls of birds, maybe distant animal noises. The smell of the land replaces the smell of the sea. It's a different kind of claustrophobia, the world narrowing to the width of the river. Following the Neva upstream leads you towards Lake Ladoga, one of the largest freshwater lakes in Europe. This is another significant body of water to cross, essentially an inland sea. It can be just as treacherous as the Baltic, with sudden storms whipping up dangerous waves. You'll need to be careful, picking your way across, sticking to the coast if possible, or making a calculated dash across the open water if the weather is settled. The shores of Ladoga were home to various Finnic tribes, like the Karelians, and later Slavic groups who were beginning to push north. These weren't empty lands. They were inhabited, and you needed to be mindful of who you encountered. Sometimes they were potential trading partners, sometimes potential threats. A mainstream historical fact here is that the town of Ladoga, later Staraja Ladoga, near the southern end of Lake Ladoga became one of the earliest and most important Rus settlements in Eastern Europe. Archaeological evidence shows a clear Scandinavian presence there from the 8th century onwards, indicating it was a key staging post and trading center on the route eastwards. It wasn't just a temporary stop. It was a place where Norse traders and settlers lived, worked, and interacted with the local populations, laying some of the groundwork for the future political structures of the region. Navigating Ladoga requires skill and knowledge of its currents and potential hazards. It's a huge lake, and getting lost or caught out in bad weather is a real danger. You might hug the southern shore, looking for the mouth of the Folkhof River, your next crucial link in the chain of waterways. This part of the journey is a test of endurance and navigation, a transition from the maritime world to the complex network of rivers and lakes that forms the backbone of the eastern trade routes. A quirky tidbit about Lake Ladoga and its surrounding areas. It's incredibly rich in archaeological sites related to this period. Excavations at places like Staraja Ladoga have unearthed vast quantities of silver coins, weights, scales, tools, weapons, and jewelry, painting a vivid picture of the intense trade and settlement activity happening here over 1,000 years ago. It's like a giant historical treasure chest, revealing the material reality of these long-distance journeys. Imagine digging up a coin minted in Baghdad or a piece of jewelry from Byzantium, found hundreds or thousands of miles from its origin, right there by the lake shore. It really brings home the scale of this ancient global network. Historians still argue whether the initial Rus presence in places like Ladoga was primarily driven by trade interests, military expansion, or a combination of both. Were they invited in as protectors and administrators, or did they arrive as conquerors? The truth is likely nuanced, with different motivations and outcomes in different places and at different times. The early interactions were probably complex, involving negotiation, alliance, conflict, and intermarriage. You, as a merchant on this ship, are part of that dynamic process, navigating not just the waters, but the intricate social and political landscape of the Northeast. As you cross Ladoga, the land around you changes. The forests seem deeper, the settlements sparser away from the main trading points. The air is fresh, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. You're moving further and further from the familiar world, deeper into the vastness of Eastern Europe. The next step, finding the Volga River and heading south, is another commitment, another push deeper into the unknown, or at least the less familiar. The rhythmic slap of the waves against the hull continues, a constant reminder of the miles you've covered and the many, many miles that still lie ahead. You've made it across Lake Ladoga, hopefully without getting swallowed by a sudden storm or getting completely lost in the vastness. Now comes the next step, finding the mouth of the Volga River. It's not always obvious, a gap in the shoreline that leads you inland. The water here is definitely fresh, a welcome change from the sometimes brackish taste of the Baltic and the slightly less salty tang of Ladoga. But the current, the current is against you again. Rivers flow downhill, obviously, and you're heading uphill, metaphorically speaking, against the natural flow of water trying to get to the sea. This means the sail is often useless now, unless you get a very strong wind directly astern, which is rare and unreliable. Most of the time, you're relying on muscle power. Out come the oars. Rowing a fully loaded nar upstream is backbreaking work. The rhythmic dip and pull of the oars, the grunt of your crewmates, the slow, slow progress against the current. Or if the banks are clear enough and the river isn't too wide, you might resort to towing. Some of the crew get off the ship, haul ropes attached to the mast or the bow, and literally drag the vessel upstream from the shore. Imagine doing that for miles and miles. It's exhausting, monotonous, and incredibly slow. It gives you plenty of time to contemplate the life choices that led you to this point, mostly involving the pursuit of shiny metal circles from far-off lands. The scenery changes slowly. The dense forests press in on either side of the river. You see different trees now, deciduous mixed with pine. The air smells of damp earth, decaying leaves, and wood smoke from unseen settlements. You might catch glimpses of wildlife, deer drinking at the water's edge, various birds, maybe even the occasional bear lumbering through the trees, hopefully not too close. The river itself is your world, a winding path through an otherwise impenetrable landscape. You learn every bend, every eddy, every spot where the current is strongest or weakest. As you move south along the Volga, you're entering lands inhabited by different peoples. This region is home to various Finnic tribes, like the Chud, and increasingly, Slavic groups who have been migrating north and east. These are the people you'll be trading with, or potentially clashing with. You might see their settlements, clusters of wooden houses, fields being worked, people fishing from the banks. They look different from the people back home. Their clothes, their language, their customs are unfamiliar. Communication is tricky, relying on gestures, a few scattered words picked up on previous trips, or perhaps someone in your crew has a knack for languages. It's like trying to negotiate a multi-million-dollar deal using charades and a phrasebook you found in a dusty corner of a longhouse. You're heading towards Lake Ilmen, another large lake that serves as a crucial hub on this river system. The Volga flows out of Lake Ilmen, so you're following it upstream towards its source. The journey along the Volga is perhaps one of the most physically demanding parts of the trip so far, just sheer, relentless effort against the current. There might be small rapids in places, requiring careful navigation or even partially unloading the ship to get it through. Every day is a grind. You eat the same food, sleep on the hard deck, and wake up with aching muscles. The glamour of being a long-distance merchant is definitely wearing thin by now. A mainstream historical fact that becomes very relevant here is the establishment of a major trading center near the northern shore of Lake Ilmen. This settlement, which would eventually grow into the powerful city-state of Novgorod, became a linchpin of the eastern trade routes. It served as a meeting point between the northern fur-producing regions, the Baltic trade networks, and the southern river systems leading to Byzantium and the Caliphates. Archaeological evidence from sites like Gorodish, just south of modern Novgorod, shows a significant early Rus presence, indicating it was a crucial early base of operations for these Norse traders and warriors. As you approach Lake Ilmen, the river widens, and the landscape flattens out somewhat. The forests recede, and you see more open land, more signs of human activity. This is the heartland of the Ilmen Slavs, one of the East Slavic tribal unions mentioned in the early chronicles. They controlled the territory around the lake and the upper reaches of the Volkhov. Your relationship with them is critical. You need their permission, or at least their tolerance, to pass through their territory and, more importantly, to trade with them. They have furs, wax, honey, and potentially slaves, goods that are highly valued down south. You have silver, iron, tools, and perhaps some luxury items from the west. It's a mutual dependency, but also a situation ripe for conflict if negotiations go poorly. A quirky tidbit about the region around Lake Ilmen is its unique dialect and culture. The Ilmen Slavs developed distinct traditions, partly influenced by their interactions with neighboring Finnic and Baltic tribes, and later, the Rus. Even centuries later, the Novgorodian lands retained a certain independence and unique identity compared to other parts of Rus, perhaps a legacy of the complex early interactions and the region's importance as a trading crossroads rather than solely a political center imposed from outside. It was a melting pot, but one that brewed its own particular flavor. Historians still argue whether the initial Rus presence near Lake Ilmen was primarily invited by the local Slavic and Finnic tribes to provide protection and order, as suggested by the primary chronicle's tale of Rurik, or if it was a result of military conquest and imposition of tribute. Were the early Rus rulers welcomed administrators or foreign overlords? The truth probably lies somewhere in between, a complex interplay of mutual benefit, coercion, and evolving relationships over time. You, pulling or towing your boat up the Volkhov, are right in the middle of this dynamic, trying to make a living in a world where power structures are shifting and new identities are forming. Reaching Lake Ilmen is a milestone. It's a large, often shallow lake, and crossing it requires care, especially if the wind picks up. But it signifies that you've completed the first major river leg and are now positioned to access the next part of the route. The area around the lake shore is likely bustling with activity, other traders, local inhabitants, perhaps even other Rus groups who have settled here. It's a temporary respite from the relentless upstream struggle, a chance to assess your position, gather information, and prepare for the next challenge, which, spoiler alert, often involves getting your boat out of the water entirely. But for now, you've reached Lake Ilmen, the heart of the northern trading network, and the vast expanse of water stretches out before you, another hurdle to cross on your long, slow journey. You've reached Lake Ilmen, that vast, shallow expanse. It felt like an accomplishment after the relentless upstream slog on the Volkhov. But the journey isn't over. In fact, one of the most difficult parts is about to begin. Because the river system you followed from the Baltic, the Neva, Ladoga, Volkhov, Ilmen, and the rivers flowing into it from the south, like the Lovat, doesn't just magically connect to the great Volga river system. The land gets in the way. There's a watershed, a high point where the rivers flowing north towards the Baltic diverge from those flowing east and south towards the Caspian Sea. And you have to get your ship, and all your precious cargo, from one side of that divide to the other. This is where the concept of the Volga comes in. It's a Slavic word meaning dragging or portage, and it's exactly what it sounds like. You have to drag your ship overland from one river system to another. Imagine taking your fully loaded cargo vessel, which weighs many tons even empty, and pulling it through forests, over hills, and potentially through swamps for miles. It's the historical equivalent of deciding to carry your car over a mountain range instead of driving around it. And unlike driving, there's no road, no paved path, just nature. First, you have to find the right spot. You follow the river like the Lovat, or one of its tributaries as far south as you can. The river gets narrower, shallower, perhaps choked with reeds or fallen trees. Eventually, it becomes impassable for your boat, or you reach the point where the distance to the next navigable waterway is shortest. This is where you beach the Nar. The real work begins now. Everything has to come out of the ship. Every bale of furs, every iron ingot, every barrel of dried fish, every spare sail, every oar. It all gets unloaded and stacked on the bank. Then, the ship itself. You and your crew, perhaps with the help of local laborers you've hired or, more likely, coerced into service, start the monumental task of moving the vessel. How do you move a ship overland? Well, you certainly don't just pick it up. You might build a sort of cradle or sled for it. More commonly, you'd use logs as rollers. You place logs sideways under the keel of the ship, and then you pull. With ropes, with brute force, with levers. As the ship moves forward, you constantly have to retrieve the logs from behind and place them in front again, creating a rolling path. It's slow, painstaking, incredibly strenuous work. The ship groans and scrapes, the ropes strain, men grunt and curse. The sounds of the forest are replaced by the sounds of human effort and the friction of wood on wood, wood on earth. The terrain is rarely flat and easy. You might be pulling the ship uphill towards the watershed divide. You might be navigating through dense forest, having to clear trees or hack a path. You might encounter rocky ground that makes the rollers useless, or soft, muddy ground that the ship sinks into, turning the portage into a swampy nightmare. Imagine trying to drag a house-sized object through a bog. Fun, right? This is where even the toughest Viking might start questioning their career choices. Remember raiding monasteries? You might think, wiping sweat and mud from your brow. Much simpler. Less mud. These portage points were bottlenecks, crucial intersections on the trade routes. Control over them meant power and wealth. Local tribes or emerging Rus groups could demand tribute for passage, offer or withhold assistance, and potentially prey on vulnerable traders struggling with their boats. You were never more exposed than when your ship was out of the water, immobile and defenseless. A mainstream historical fact is that there were several well-established portage routes connecting the Baltic/Folkhof system to the Volga/Oka system. One of the most important was likely near the upper reaches of the Lovat River, leading to tributaries flowing into the Volga, often through the area of the Valdai Hills. Another significant route went further east, connecting rivers flowing into Lake Onega and then across to the upper Volga. These were not random paths. They were recognized, albeit difficult, arteries of trade that had been used for centuries, perhaps long before the Rus arrived. The process could take days, even weeks, depending on the distance of the portage, the terrain, the weather, and the number of people helping. You'd set up temporary camps at night, exhausted, aching, surrounded by your scattered cargo and the silent, looming shape of your beached ship. You'd be constantly on guard, wary of raiders or hostile locals who might see your struggle as an opportunity. Sleep, which is the whole point of this video, would probably be difficult to come by during a portage, unless your exhaustion finally claimed you. A quirky tidbit about these portages comes from the accounts of Arab travelers like Ibn Khordadbeh, who described the routes used by the Rus. They mention that the Rus traveled on rivers and lakes, and then had to carry their boats on their shoulders for a certain distance. Now, carrying a nar on your shoulder seems unlikely, given their size and weight. This description might be an exaggeration, a misunderstanding, or perhaps refers to smaller boats used on some portages, or maybe even just implies the sheer manual labor involved, making it feel like carrying the boat. Or maybe they were just really strong back then. We'll go with exaggeration. Historians still argue whether the control of these key portage routes was a primary driver for the establishment of early Rus strongholds in places like Novgorod and later, further south. Was securing these bottlenecks and taxing the trade passing through them the main goal of the early Rus chieftains, providing them with the wealth and power to build their polities? Or were these settlements primarily focused on controlling the sources of goods like furs and slaves, with the routes just being necessary infrastructure? As you finally crest the highest point of the portage, the land begins to slope downwards. Ahead through the trees you might glimpse the glint of water, a small stream, a lake, the headwaters of the next river system. It's a moment of relief, but the work isn't over. You still have to get the ship down to the water, which can be just as tricky as getting it up, trying to control its descent on the rollers, making sure it doesn't slide away or get damaged. Eventually, after what feels like an eternity of sweat, strain, and muttered curses, you reach the water. You launch the ship, carefully checking for any damage sustained during the ordeal. You reload all your cargo, piece by painstaking piece. Your muscles ache, your hands are raw, and you are utterly, completely exhausted. But you've done it. You've crossed the divide. You are now in a river system that flows east and south. You have entered the waterways that will eventually lead you to the Great Volga. The portage is behind you, a grueling memory, and the current, for the first time in a long time, is now with you. You can finally let the river do some of the work. You've made it. The water is beneath the ship again, supporting its weight, carrying you along. The aching in your muscles is still there, a deep thrumming reminder of the Volga, but the immediate, grinding effort is over. You've left the small stream or lake that marked the end of the portage behind, and you are now drifting down a river that is slowly, steadily, growing wider and deeper. The current, blessedly, is with you now. It's a gentle pull at first, easing you downstream, requiring only minor corrections with the steering oar. After days of fighting against the flow, or hauling the ship over land, this feels like a miracle. You can rest your arms, feel the sun, if it's out, on your face, and just let the river carry you. The landscape is still heavily forested, but perhaps less dense than the tangled woods around the portage trails. The river banks are lower, less steep. You see more signs of human activity now, scattered clearings, fishing weirs in the river, perhaps a dugout canoe paddling upstream or across. These are the headwaters of the mighty Volga system, a vast network of rivers and tributaries that drains a huge portion of Eastern Europe. You are now on the eastern side of the great watershed divide, committed to a journey that will take you far, far from the Baltic Sea and the familiar northern world. As you drift downstream, the river continues to widen. Tributaries join it, adding their flow, making the current stronger and the channel deeper. The trees on the banks seem to recede, giving you a broader view of the sky and the land. The air feels different here, perhaps warmer, carrying the scent of different plants. You might start seeing different kinds of birds, different fish in the water. The sounds change too. The rush of the growing current becomes more prominent, mixing with the creak of your ship and the calls of your crew. This part of the journey is about patience and vigilance. While the river is doing the work of moving you downstream, you still need to navigate carefully, avoiding submerged logs, sandbars, or shallows. You need to keep an eye on the banks, watching for potential ambushes or settlements that might be friendly or hostile. You are passing through lands inhabited by various peoples, Finnic tribes like the Maria and Neroma, and various Slavic groups who are pushing eastwards. Your interactions with them will range from cautious trading to tense standoffs. You might encounter other boats on the river now. Not just small local craft, but perhaps other trading vessels, maybe even other Rus ships who have come down a different route. These encounters can be opportunities to share information, trade goods, or sadly, sometimes lead to conflict. The rivers are highways, but like any highway, they have their share of bandits and tolls. You need to be ready to defend yourself and your cargo. Remember those few warriors you brought along? This is where they earn their keep. The anticipation builds as the river grows. You know, from the tales of those who have gone before, that you are approaching something immense. The Great River, the Volga. It's the longest river in Europe, flowing for thousands of miles, connecting the forests of the north to the rich markets of the south. It's not just a river, it's an artery of global trade, a pathway linking Scandinavia and the Baltic to the Islamic world and Byzantium. And then you reach it. The moment you enter the main channel of the Volga is unforgettable. The river is vast, wider than anything you've navigated before, perhaps wider than some of the seas you've crossed. It feels less like a river and more like an inland sea, stretching to the horizon on either side. The current here is powerful, a steady, relentless force pulling you south and east. Your small nar feels even smaller on this immense waterway, a tiny speck on a vast, moving surface. The scale is breathtaking. The banks are often out of sight, or just low, distant lines of trees. You might see islands, large enough to have their own forests. The wind can whip up significant waves on this broad expanse. It's a different kind of navigation than the narrow, winding rivers you were on before. This is about staying in the main channel, using the powerful current to your advantage, and being constantly aware of the sheer distance you still have to travel. Think of it like finally getting onto a major interstate highway after driving on winding country roads for days. The speed is better, but the scale is intimidating. The sheer volume of water flowing past is immense. It carries silt and debris, making the water murky, a stark contrast to the clear waters of some northern lakes. The sound of the current is a constant roar, a powerful background hum that speaks of the river's strength and the long journey ahead. You are now on the true eastern route, the one that leads to the fabled lands of silver and spices. A mainstream historical fact is that the Volga River route was the most important trade artery connecting northern Europe with the Middle East and Central Asia during the Viking Age. While the Dnieper route, leading to Byzantium, is perhaps more famous in Western narratives, the Volga route, leading to the Khazar Khaganate and the markets of the Caspian Sea, was arguably even more significant in terms of the sheer volume of silver dirhams that flowed northwards in exchange for furs, slaves, and other northern products. This route was the primary driver of wealth for many of the early Rus leaders and settlements. Life on the Volga is different. You might see more diverse types of boats, flat-bottomed riverboats, used by local tribes, perhaps larger vessels from further south. You might encounter more people on the banks, settlements growing larger and more complex as you move downstream. The air might grow warmer as you travel south, the forests perhaps changing character, becoming less purely coniferous and more mixed. A quirky tidbit about the Volga and its impact. The vast quantities of silver dirhams that came north via this route profoundly influenced the economy and society of Scandinavia and the Baltic region. These coins, often chopped up and used as hack silver, became a form of currency and a source of wealth that fueled further trade, raiding, and political development. Hoards of Arab silver coins are found buried across Scandinavia and Eastern Europe, silent witnesses to the incredible reach and profitability of the Volga trade route. It's like discovering that all the wealth in your country came from trading beaver pelts for bitkins with people living thousands of miles away. Historians still argue whether the control of the Volga route was the primary factor that led to the consolidation of power by the early Rus rulers, enabling them to extract tribute from local tribes and dominate the long-distance trade. Was it the wealth from the Volga that funded their expansion and state building, or were other factors, like military organization and control of local resources, equally or more important? The sheer scale of the silver hoard suggests the economic power of the route was immense, but the political dynamics were likely complex. As you settle into life on the Volga, the rhythm of the journey changes again. It's less about fighting the current or dragging the ship, and more about managing the vastness, staying alert, and covering huge distances. The days become a blur of watching the river banks drift by, navigating minor hazards, and keeping the ship moving steadily downstream. The destination is still incredibly far away, a distant concept of bustling southern markets and unimaginable riches. But you are on the right path now, on the great highway of the East, carried along by the powerful current of the Volga, deeper and deeper into the heart of the continent. The mighty Volga sweeps you along now, a vast, brown highway stretching endlessly south and east. The current is strong, a powerful, silent force doing most of the work. It's a relief after the backbreaking portage and the upstream slogs, but the sheer scale of the river is a constant, humbling presence. You are now truly immersed in the heart of Eastern Europe, a world away from the familiar fjords and coastlines of home. The air might be getting noticeably warmer as you drift further south. The sun, when it appears, feels stronger. Life settles into a new rhythm on this great river. Days are spent watching the seemingly endless banks drift by. Sometimes they are low and marshy, a tangle of reeds and willow. Sometimes they rise into gentle hills, topped with forests that stretch back further than you can see. The river is so wide in places that the opposite bank is barely visible, a faint line on the horizon. You navigate by instinct, by the subtle pull of the strongest current, by the shape of islands and sandbars that force you to choose your path. There are fewer rapids here on the main Volga channel, at least in the upper and middle reaches, but the sheer size of the waterway presents its own challenges. Sudden changes in wind can whip up dangerous waves, and submerged obstacles in the vast expanse are harder to spot. As you move downstream, you begin to encounter more signs of permanent settlement. These aren't just temporary fishing camps. You see clusters of wooden houses, cleared fields, perhaps even palisaded enclosures on higher ground. These are the villages and strongholds of the various East Slavic tribes who inhabit the lands bordering the upper and middle Volga and its tributaries. Tribes like the Krivichi, the Vyatiki, or perhaps the Severians further south. Your interaction with them is crucial to the success of your journey. They control the land you pass through, and they possess the very goods you've come all this way to acquire: furs, honey, wax, and perhaps most valuable of all, slaves. Trading with these tribes is a delicate dance. You arrive, a group of armed foreigners in a strange ship, and you need to establish trust, or at least a wary tolerance. You might anchor offshore and send a small group ashore to negotiate, or you might be invited to a specific trading point. Communication is difficult. You're dealing with Slavic languages, which are different from your own Norse tongue, and different from the Finnic languages you might have encountered further north. You rely on interpreters if you have them, or resort to a pidgin mix of languages, gestures, and the universal language of weighing silver. You display your goods, the silver you brought from the west, perhaps in coin form or as ingots and jewelry, iron tools and weapons, which are highly valued, amber, fine textiles if you manage to acquire any. They show you theirs, bundles of soft, luxurious furs, sable, ermine, fox, squirrel, trapped during the long northern winter, beeswax and honey gathered from the forests, and people, captives taken in raids or warfare, bound and ready to be sold into servitude. The negotiations are lengthy and often tense. You haggle over prices, test the quality of the furs, weigh the silver carefully on your portable scales. Trust is fragile. Both sides are wary of being cheated or attacked. You are constantly aware of the potential for things to go wrong, a misunderstanding, a perceived insult, or simply the temptation of your valuable cargo proving too great for the local chieftain. You need to be firm but fair, ready to defend yourself but also eager to maintain peaceful relations, because you still have a very long way to go, and you might need to trade with the same groups on your way back. A mainstream historical fact about this stage of the journey is that the Rus traders often established fortified trading posts or gorodish, fortified settlements, along the major river routes, including on the Volga. These served as secure bases for storing goods, wintering over, and facilitating trade with the local populations. While not as famous as Novgorod or Kiev, sites like Timirovo near modern Yaroslavl or Nezdovo near Smolensk, on a different route, but illustrating the principle, show a significant Rus presence and intense trading activity along these rivers. These weren't just transient stops. They were places where Norse traders and warriors settled, intermarried, and became part of the local power structure. Life in these temporary or semi-permanent trading camps along the Volga could be rough. You'd be living in simple huts or tents, exposed to the elements, dealing with mud, insects, and the constant threat of disease. The food would be basic, reliant on your provisions and what you could trade or hunt locally. Entertainment was likely limited to storytelling, perhaps some drinking, and the sheer exhaustion of the day's activities ensuring sleep came easily, despite the discomfort. Imagine trying to get a good night's rest when your bed is the damp ground and your neighbors are a bunch of heavily armed, potentially smelly, and definitely snoring Vikings. A quirky tidbit about the goods traded here: while furs and slaves were the big-ticket items heading south, iron was a crucial commodity flowing north and east. The Rus and other traders brought iron ingots and finished iron goods, tools, weapons, from Scandinavia and the Baltic region, where iron production was relatively advanced. These were highly sought after by the Slavic and Finnic tribes, who might have had less developed metallurgy or access to ore. So, while you might think of Vikings just taking things, a huge part of their activity was facilitating the exchange of essential resources across vast distances. It was a two-way street, even if one side occasionally decided to just take what they wanted instead of trading for it. Historians still argue about the exact nature of the relationship between the Rus traders and the East Slavic tribes in these early centuries. Was it primarily based on peaceful trade and mutual benefit, with the Rus acting as intermediaries connecting the north and south? Or was it fundamentally a relationship of dominance and exploitation, with the Rus using their military superiority to extract tribute, like furs and slaves, from the local populations? The truth is likely a complex mix, varying depending on the specific tribe, the strength of the Rus group, and the time period. There were undoubtedly periods of conflict and subjugation, but also periods of peaceful coexistence, intermarriage, and cultural exchange. As you continue down the Volga, the river becomes your world. The landscape might change subtly, the types of trees, the shape of the hills, the feel of the air. You pass the mouths of large tributaries joining the main river, each one a potential pathway to other lands and other peoples. You are covering immense distances now, propelled by the current. The sheer scale of the journey begins to sink in, the hundreds, potentially thousands, of miles you have already traveled, and the many more that still lie ahead. Each trading encounter, each bend in the river, takes you further from the familiar, deeper into a vast and complex world connected by this immense waterway. The rhythmic slosh of the water, the distant cries of birds, the low murmur of your crew, these are the sounds that accompany your sleep as the Volga carries you steadily southward. The Volga continues its relentless flow, carrying you steadily south and east. For days, weeks maybe, you've been on this immense waterway, the rhythm of the current a constant presence. The forests on the banks might start to thin in places, giving way to more open steppe-like landscapes, hinting at the changing climate as you move further south. The air feels different, perhaps drier, warmer, carrying the scent of distant grasslands rather than damp northern forests. You've traded with scattered Slavic tribes, perhaps navigated past the territories of others who were less welcoming. You've seen diverse landscapes and encountered peoples whose ways are utterly foreign to you. But you know, from the stories and the rumors, that you are approaching a major destination, a true hub of commerce on this great river. Signs of increased activity become more frequent. You see more boats on the river, larger ones than the local dugouts, perhaps broad-beamed cargo vessels similar to your own, or even stranger craft you don't recognize. The settlements on the banks grow larger, more permanent-looking. You might pass fortified points, perhaps controlled by local chieftains or perhaps by other groups seeking to control access to the river. The feeling of vast, empty wilderness slowly gives way to a sense of approaching a significant center of human habitation and activity. The river itself seems to anticipate the change, perhaps widening even further, or being joined by a major tributary that signals your proximity to the goal. And then you see it. Or rather, you see the signs of its approach. More boats, a cluster of masts on the horizon, the distinct shape of permanent buildings along the river bank. The air fills with a different kind of sound, not just the wind and the water, but the distant murmur of a large crowd, the clang of hammers, the cries of merchants. The smell changes too, a mix of wood smoke, cooking fires, animals, spices you can't identify, and the general, earthy aroma of a large, bustling settlement. You are approaching Bulgar, one of the most important trading cities on the Volga route, the capital of the Volga Bulgars. Your ship glides towards the docks, or perhaps just a suitable stretch of riverbank where other vessels are gathered. The scene that greets you is overwhelming after the relative solitude of the river journey. It's a riot of color, sound, and activity. People of all descriptions throng the waterfront, the local Volga Bulgars, a Turkic-speaking people who have established a powerful kingdom here, Arab and Persian merchants from the south, easily identifiable by their clothing and darker complexions, traders from Central Asia, perhaps even from as far east as the Silk Road, representatives of the Khazar Khaganate, whose vast empire you are technically entering, and, of course, other Rus and Scandinavian traders like yourself, some familiar faces, other strangers. It's like stepping into a different world, a nexus where north meets south, east meets west, connected by this incredible river. The city itself is impressive. Accounts from travelers like Ibn Faddan describe it as a large, wooden city, though archaeological evidence suggests there were also stone or brick buildings, particularly for mosques and the rulers' residences. It's fortified, surrounded by walls or palisades, a necessity in this often unstable region. You see minarets rising above the rooftops, a clear sign that the ruling class of the Volga Bulgars has adopted Islam, setting them apart from the pagan tribes you've encountered further north, and indeed, from most of the Rus themselves at this time. This religious difference adds another layer of complexity to the interactions here. You are a pagan trader from the north, dealing with Muslim rulers and merchants from the south. The market is the heart of the city, a chaotic, vibrant, and potentially dangerous place. Stalls and shops are crammed together, offering an astonishing array of goods. You see the familiar furs you brought from the north, laid out alongside luxurious silks from Byzantium, spices from India, perfumes from Arabia, precious metals, jewelry crafted in styles you've never seen before, weapons, tools, and of course, people for sale. The slave market is a prominent, grim feature of these southern hubs. The air is thick with the scent of commerce, a mix of exotic goods, animals, and sweat. Trading in Volga is a complex affair. You need to understand the local customs, the system of weights and measures, and the value of different currencies. While you might have some silver coins or ingots with you, the preferred currency here is often the silver dirham, the coin of the Arab caliphates. You'll be weighing your silver carefully, checking its purity, and negotiating prices for the goods you want to acquire, spices, silks, perhaps weapons or jewelry, but primarily, more silver. This is the main goal, to convert the furs, slaves, and other northern goods you brought into as much southern silver as possible. A mainstream historical fact about Volga is its immense importance as a trading entrepot. Located strategically near the confluence of the Volga and Kama rivers, it controlled access to vast hinterlands rich in furs and other resources. The city flourished from the 9th to the 13th centuries, becoming a major center of wealth and culture, largely thanks to its role as the primary gateway for goods flowing between northern Europe and the Middle East via the Volga route. It wasn't just a market. It was the capital of a powerful state that levied taxes on trade and maintained a degree of order along its stretch of the river. Negotiations are conducted in a babel of languages: Turkic, Arabic, Persian, Slavic, Norse, Greek. You rely on interpreters, often multilingual slaves or other traders who have spent years on the route. Trust is built on reputation, or simply on the immediate transaction. You need to be constantly alert, watching for thieves, dishonest merchants, or officials demanding excessive tolls or bribes. It's a high-stakes game, played out in the crowded, dusty lanes of the market. Remember those worries about a bad deal back home? Multiply that by about 100, at the threat of being robbed or cheated by people who don't speak your language, and you're getting close. A quirky tidbit about the Volga Bulgars and their trade: they were not just passive recipients of goods. They were active participants in the trade network, producing their own goods, particularly fine leather and furs from their own territory, and acting as middlemen for goods coming from further east. Some accounts even suggest they were involved in crafts like metalworking and jewelry production, adding their own unique products to the mix of goods flowing through the city. They weren't just a toll booth on the river. They were a sophisticated society with their own economy and culture, albeit one deeply intertwined with the long-distance trade. Historians still argue about the exact relationship between the Rus traders and the Volga Bulgars. Were the Rus simply merchants passing through, paying tolls and trading peacefully? Or were there periods of conflict, with Rus groups attempting to raid Volga or bypass its control? The historical sources mention both trade and conflict, suggesting a complex and evolving dynamic. The wealth of Volga was a magnet for northern traders, but also potentially a target for those seeking to acquire riches through force rather than exchange. You spend days, maybe weeks, in Volga. You trade your furs for silver, acquire any goods you might want to take further south or back north, reprovision your ship, and gather information about the route ahead. The sheer volume of silver flowing through this city is staggering. You see piles of dirhams being weighed, counted, and exchanged. This is the source of the wealth that is transforming the north, driving the demand for the goods you carry. It's a tangible connection to a world far more populous and wealthy than your own. As you prepare to leave Volga, your ship is lighter on furs and heavier on silver, perhaps also laden with exotic goods like spices, silks, or glass beads. You've navigated the complexities of the market, survived the crowds, and hopefully made a profit. But the journey is far from over. The Volga stretches southwards, leading towards the vast Caspian Sea and the even greater power of the Khazar Khaganate. The next leg of the journey will bring new landscapes, new peoples, and potentially even greater dangers, including the infamous river rapids that lie downstream. But for now, you've reached the heart of the Volga trade, experienced the vibrancy of Bulgar, and are ready to continue your long, slow drift towards the distant south. You've left the bustling, noisy, and perhaps slightly overwhelming city of Bulgar behind. Your ship is loaded differently now, less raw material from the north, more shiny silver from the south, and maybe some exotic goods that smell intriguing and promise good prices back home. The relief of having completed a major trading stop is palpable, a moment to breathe before the next long stretch of the journey. But the Volga, while still carrying you downstream, holds new challenges and dangers as you continue southwards. The river isn't just a peaceful highway, it's a contested territory, and nature itself can throw obstacles in your path. As you move further south from Bulgar, the character of the river can change. While much of the main Volga is broad and relatively calm, there are stretches where the geography conspires to make passage difficult. The most notorious of these are the rapids. Imagine the vast Volga, funneling its immense volume of water through narrower channels or over rocky outcrops. This creates stretches of turbulent, fast-flowing water, churning with eddies and potentially hiding submerged rocks that can rip the bottom out of your precious Nar. Navigating these rapids requires skill, nerve, and a good dose of luck. You can hear the rapids before you see them. The gentle murmur of the current gradually gives way to a low roar, growing steadily louder as you approach. The water ahead looks agitated, choppy, perhaps even white with foam. The tension on the ship rises. This isn't a time for sleep or relaxation. Everyone is on alert, gripping the sides of the ship, watching the water, ready to react. The sail is useless here. You rely on oars to try and steer through the chaos. Or perhaps you even have to get out and tow the ship from the banks again, using ropes to guide it slowly and carefully through the worst of the turbulence. A different kind of portage, but just as dangerous. Getting stuck on a rock in the middle of the Volga rapids is a nightmare scenario. The current would pound your ship, potentially breaking it apart, scattering your cargo and leaving you and your crew stranded or worse. Even if you survive, salvaging anything from the churning water would be incredibly difficult. So, you approach these stretches with extreme caution, relying on the knowledge passed down through generations of traders, perhaps even hiring local pilots who know the specific twists and turns of the difficult spots. It's a white-knuckle ride, punctuated by the creak of the timbers, the roar of the water, and the shouted commands of the person at the steering oar. After the quiet monotony of the long drifts, this sudden burst of intense activity can be quite jarring, even if it's over relatively quickly compared to the days of rowing. But natural obstacles aren't the only, or even the primary, danger. As you carry increasingly valuable cargo, that hard-won silver from Bulgar, you become a more tempting target. The banks of the Volga are home to various groups, some of whom see passing traders not as potential customers, but as mobile sources of wealth. This is bandit country. Raiders, whether independent gangs, disgruntled local tribes, or even elements linked to larger powers, might lie in wait along the riverbanks, ready to ambush vulnerable ships. You have those few warriors aboard for a reason. Their job isn't to fight pitched battles, but to provide defense against smaller attacks, to make your ship look less like an easy target. You are constantly scanning the banks, watching for movement in the trees, listening for sounds that don't belong, a snapped twig, a hushed voice. At night, you might try to anchor in the middle of the widest part of the river, far from the banks, or seek out small islands for a slightly more secure camp, posting sentries to keep watch. Sleep, even on the quiet stretches, is often fitful, one ear always listening for the sound of approaching danger. Encounters with raiders could take various forms. They might try to attack your ship directly from smaller boats, attempting to board and overwhelm your crew. They might use bows and arrows from the banks, trying to disable your ship or kill crew members. Or they might simply appear on the bank at a difficult passage, like a narrow channel or the end of a rapid, and demand a toll or tribute for safe passage, backed by the implicit threat of force. This is where negotiation skills, backed up by a visible display of readiness to fight, are essential. You might have to pay to get through, losing some of your precious profit. but hopefully saving your ship and your lives. It's a form of extortion, a tax levied by those who control strategic points on the river. Remember those tolls you paid at VOLGA? Think of this as the unofficial, more violent version. A mainstream historical fact about the dangers on the VOLGA route is that Arab sources, particularly Ibn Fadlan, described the Rus traders themselves as being heavily armed and ready for conflict, indicating that the route was far from peaceful. Ibn Fadlan, who traveled with a caravan that included Rus, recounts how they were constantly wary of attacks and had to be prepared to fight their way through. This highlights that the need for defense was a standard part of the journey, not an unusual occurrence. Life during these tense stretches is exhausting. The constant vigilance, the physical strain of navigating difficult water, the anxiety of potential attack, it wears you down. Even when there's no immediate threat, the awareness of the possibility is always there, a low hum of stress beneath the surface of your consciousness. Your food might be running low, your water stale, your clothes damp and uncomfortable. The romance of the journey is definitely overshadowed by the grim reality of survival and profit. It's less epic voyage, more stressful commute through a dangerous neighborhood with rapids. A quirky tidbit about river travel security in this era. Some accounts mention that traders might use specific signals or even employ local guards from certain tribes who had a reputation for neutrality, or who controlled particularly dangerous areas, essentially paying for protection rackets along certain stretches of the river. It was a complex ecosystem of trade, tribute, and occasional violence, where knowing who to pay and who to fight was key to survival. It's like having to hire a specific gang to escort you through certain parts of the city, just to make sure other gangs don't mess with you. Historians still argue whether the primary threat on the VOLGA route came from independent bandits, from local tribal groups resisting Rus encroachment or seeking to profit from their passage, or from competing groups of Rus or other powerful entities like the Khazars or their vassals seeking to control the trade. The decentralized nature of power along much of the route likely meant that all these threats were present to varying degrees, making the journey a constant calculation of risk and reward. Despite the dangers, you push on. The river pulls you forward, south and east. The rapids are navigated, the potential ambushes avoided or fought through. Each challenge overcome is a small victory, another step closer to your ultimate destination. The landscape might continue to change subtly, the forests perhaps becoming less dense, the riverbanks lower, the air warmer. You are moving out of the purely Slavic tribal territories and approaching the sphere of influence of a much larger, more organized power. The dangers haven't ended, but they might change in character. You are leaving the realm of independent raiders and entering lands controlled by a mighty empire, one that levies its own tolls and enforces its own, sometimes harsh, rules. You are approaching the domain of the Khazar Khaganate, and the great city at the mouth of the river. The dangers of the rapids and the lurking threat of raiders gradually recede behind you. Not entirely gone, of course, this is still a wild, unpredictable world, but the nature of the journey begins to shift once more. The river is still immense, carrying you south with its powerful current, but the feeling of untamed wilderness starts to lessen. You begin to see more signs of a larger, more organized presence along the banks. Perhaps you spot patrols in swift, unfamiliar boats, keeping an eye on river traffic. You might see more substantial fortifications on bluffs overlooking the water, clearly designed not just for defense against raiding parties, but for controlling passage. The air might feel different, perhaps warmer, drier, carrying the scent of vast, open grasslands rather than dense forest. You are leaving the mosaic of independent or semi-independent Slavic and Finnic tribes behind and entering the domain of a true empire. You are approaching the lands of the Khazar Khaganate. For centuries, the Khazars, a Turkic-speaking people, had built a vast empire stretching across the steppes between the Volga and the Dnieper, controlling crucial trade routes linking the Baltic, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East. Their power was based on controlling these arteries of commerce, levying tolls, and providing a degree of stability, or at least, a predictable system of taxation, that allowed long-distance trade to flourish. For you, the Viking merchant, entering Khazar territory is a necessity. They control the lower Volga, the gateway to the Caspian Sea and the markets of the south. You can't bypass them, you have to deal with them. This marks a significant change from the interactions you've had so far. You're no longer just negotiating with local chieftains or trying to avoid bandits. You are entering the sphere of a centralized state, with its own laws, its own officials, and its own formidable military power. This means that while the threat of random violence might lessen in the core Khazar territories, it's replaced by the certainty of official demands. You will be expected to pay tolls for passage, perhaps multiple times, as you travel through their lands. There will be rules about how you conduct trade, where you can stop, and what is permitted. It's a more formal, bureaucratic kind of challenge than wrestling your boat over a portage trail. Think of it as graduating from dealing with neighborhood bullies to dealing with the tax authorities. Equally unpleasant, but in a structured sort of way. As you travel deeper into Khazar lands, the landscape continues to change. The forests might recede almost entirely, replaced by vast, flat steppes stretching towards the horizon. The riverbanks become lower, sometimes just marshy plains. The sky seems bigger, the weather more extreme, scorching heat in the summer, biting winds in the winter. You might see herds of grazing animals, perhaps nomadic camps of people who owe allegiance or pay tribute to the Khazar Khagan. The feeling is one of immense, open space, a stark contrast to the enclosed river valleys you navigated earlier. You might encounter Khazar officials or garrisons stationed at strategic points along the river. These are the people who will collect the tolls. They might board your ship, inspect your cargo, and demand a percentage of its value, perhaps in furs, slaves, or silver. Negotiation is possible, but defiance is probably suicidal. You pay what they demand, grit your teeth, and factor the loss into your overall profit calculation. It's just the cost of doing business on this route. It adds a certain, predictable pain to the journey, doesn't it? Like knowing you're definitely going to step on a Lego in the dark at some point tonight. A mainstream historical fact about the Khazar Khaganate is that its ruling elite converted to Judaism sometime between the 8th and 10th centuries. While the majority of the population practiced other religions, Islam, Christianity, paganism, the adoption of Judaism by the rulers was a unique development in the region and likely influenced their political and cultural identity. It also placed them in a distinct position between the Christian Byzantine Empire to the southwest and the expanding Muslim caliphates to the south. Life on the river through Khazar territory involves a lot of watching and waiting. You watch the banks, not just for raiders now, but for official checkpoints. You wait for inspections, for the inevitable demands for tolls. You continue to eat your dried provisions, mend your gear, and manage the daily life aboard the ship. The conversation might turn to the rumors you've heard about the Khazar capital, Itil, the great city at the mouth of the river. Tales of its size, its wealth, its diversity, and the strange customs of its inhabitants. It's the ultimate destination on this leg of the journey, the place where the real riches are said to be found. A quirky tidbit about the Khazars, mentioned by Ibn Fadlan, is the elaborate and somewhat bizarre protocol surrounding their rulers, the Khagans. The Khagan himself was often kept in semi-seclusion, a figurehead with immense spiritual authority but perhaps limited direct power. When he died, a complex ritual was involved, and his burial place was kept secret, with accounts suggesting rivers might even be diverted to flow over the grave to conceal it. It paints a picture of a society with complex, almost mystical, ideas about kingship, far removed from the more straightforward warrior chieftains you might know from back home. Historians still argue whether the Khazar Khaganate's power was primarily based on its control of trade routes and the wealth derived from tolls and markets, or if it relied more heavily on military dominance over subject peoples and the extraction of tribute. Was it a trading empire first and foremost, or a conquering state that facilitated trade? The truth is likely a combination, but the economic importance of the Volga route to the Khazars is undeniable. As you continue downstream, the river widens even further, becoming almost like an inland sea in places. The air grows warmer still, carrying the scent of salt, not the salt of the Baltic, but the salt of the vast, landlocked Caspian Sea, your ultimate destination. You see different types of boats, different faces on the banks. You are getting closer to the heart of the Khazar realm, closer to the great city of Itil. The anticipation builds. You've survived the portages, the rapids, the raiders, and the tolls. Now you face the complexities and opportunities of the Khazar capital, the nexus of trade between north and south. The endless river carries you forward, the promise of silver driving you on through the vast, open lands of the Khaganate, towards the glittering, bewildering city at the end of the line. The Volga has carried you through the open, steppe-like lands of the Khaganate, past the official checkpoints and the watchful garrisons. The air is definitely warmer now, drier, carrying the scent of sun-baked earth and perhaps distant salt from the great inland sea you are approaching. The river has widened even further, a truly immense body of water that feels more like a lake than a river. And then, on the horizon, you see it. Not a single settlement, but something far grander, something that stretches along both banks of the river and out onto islands in the delta. You are arriving at Itil, the capital city of the Khazar Khaganate, the legendary nexus of the eastern trade routes. The sheer scale is staggering. Unlike the northern settlements which cling to one bank, Itil sprawls across the Volga Delta. Accounts from travelers describe it as being split into two main parts, one on the western bank and one on the eastern, with the river flowing between them, and perhaps even a third section on an island in the middle, where the Khagan himself resided. Imagine trying to navigate a city where the main street is a mile-wide river, and you need a boat just to visit your neighbor across town. It makes finding your way around feel like a whole new adventure in itself. Excuse me, is this the ferry to the spice market, or just someone's really big rowboat? As you approach, the river traffic intensifies dramatically. Boats of all sizes and descriptions are everywhere, small fishing skiffs, broad-beamed cargo barges, sleek vessels with unfamiliar rigging, and more ships like your own, belonging to other traders from the north or west. The air is filled with a cacophony of sounds, the shouts of boatmen, the cries of gulls, the lowing of animals, the distant hum of thousands of people going about their business. The smell is overwhelming after the clean air of the river, a pungent mix of cooking fires, animal waste, exotic spices, tanning hides, and simply the concentrated aroma of a very large, very diverse human population. Gaining entry and permission to trade isn't as simple as just tying up anywhere you please. The Khazars maintain strict control over their capital and the lucrative trade that flows through it. You might be met by Khazar officials in swift boats, who will escort you to a designated mooring area. There will be inspections, paperwork of a sort, or at least, verbal declarations and possibly tally sticks, and the inevitable demand for tolls and customs duties. This is the price of admission to the Khazar market, a percentage of your cargo that you must surrender to the authorities. It's formal, it's official, and it's unavoidable. Remember those informal tolls demanded by potential raiders upstream? This is the organized version, backed by the full power of the Khaganate. You might grumble, you might try to haggle slightly, but ultimately you pay. It's just another cost of doing this particular business. Once cleared, you find a place to moor your ship amongst hundreds of others. Stepping onto the banks of Itil is like stepping into a living map of the known world. The city is described as having distinct quarters, each inhabited by different communities. There are districts for Muslims, Christians, Jews, pagans, including many Rus and other northern traders, and people from Central Asia and beyond. Each community often had its own religious buildings, mosques, churches, synagogues, pagan temples, and its own laws and customs, administered by representatives appointed by the Khazar authorities. It was a truly multicultural, multi-religious metropolis, a melting pot on the edge of the steppe. The markets in Itil are legendary. They are vast, sprawling affairs, offering goods from across Eurasia. You see the silks and spices you might have only dreamed of, brought from India and China along the Silk Road. There are precious metals and jewels from the south, fine textiles from Byzantium, weapons and armor from the Islamic world, and slaves and furs from the north, your own stock in trade, now being offered alongside goods from half a dozen continents. The sheer variety is dizzying. You could spend days just wandering through the market, marveling at the goods and listening to the babble of languages being spoken. Imagine trying to buy a new axe head and ending up haggling for a parrot and some frankincense. A mainstream historical fact about ITIL is that its existence and wealth were entirely dependent on its location on the Volga trade route, and its ability to control and tax the flow of goods. Arab geographers and travelers like Ibn Hawqal and al-Masudi provide valuable, though sometimes conflicting, descriptions of the city in the 10th century, highlighting its diverse population, its extensive markets, and the central role of the Khazar rulers in facilitating and profiting from the long-distance trade. Its strategic position made it the indispensable gateway between northern Europe and the Caspian Sea world. Life in ITIL for a visiting merchant is a mix of intense business and cautious exploration. You need to secure your cargo, find trustworthy people to trade with, and navigate the complex social and legal landscape of the city. You might stay in lodging houses catering to foreign merchants, or perhaps camp near your ship with your crew. You'd be constantly aware of your surroundings, as a city this wealthy also attracts its share of thieves and swindlers. The Khazar authorities enforced order, but you were still a foreigner in a strange land. A quirky tidbit about the administration of ITIL, according to some sources, was the presence of judges representing each of the major religious communities, Jews, Muslims, Christians, and even pagans, who would administer justice according to their own laws for their respective communities. This suggests a remarkable degree of tolerance and pragmatism on the part of the Khazar rulers, who understood that facilitating trade for such a diverse population required accommodating their different legal and religious traditions. It's a surprisingly modern concept for a kingdom on the edge of the steppes over 1,000 years ago. Historians still argue about the exact size and layout of ITIL, as the city's remains are difficult to locate and excavate due to changes in the Volga Delta over the centuries. Was it a truly massive metropolis numbering tens or even hundreds of thousands, as some accounts suggest, or were the populations of the different sections perhaps overestimated? The archaeological evidence that has been found points to a significant settlement, but precisely mapping its full extent and population remains a challenge, leaving its true size open to scholarly debate. You spend your time in ITIL assessing the market, weighing your silver, and negotiating the best possible deals for the goods you want to acquire. You see merchants from lands you've only heard whispered names of, people who have traveled across vast deserts or sailed on distant seas. You realize that the world is even bigger and more interconnected than you imagined back in your home harbor. ITIL is the proof of that connection, a vibrant, chaotic, and astonishing place where the threads of trade from north, south, east, and west are woven together. You've reached the heart of the Khazar realm, the glittering prize at the end of the Volga, ready to make your fortune before the long, difficult journey back home. The sounds of the city, a constant, multi-layered drone, might even lull you to sleep, a strange, exotic lullaby after months of wind and water. You've arrived, paid your initial tolls, and found a place to tie up your nar amidst the incredible variety of vessels lining the banks and islands of ITIL. The sheer volume of boats, people, and noise is a stark contrast to the quiet solitude of the river journey. Now, the real work begins, turning your northern goods into southern silver. Trading in ITIL is nothing like bartering with a few scattered tribes along a riverbank. This is a sophisticated, complex, and highly controlled market operating within a powerful empire. Your first task is to unload your cargo and get it ready for display. The bales of furs, perhaps a few remaining slaves, any honey, wax, or other goods you brought this far. You need to find a spot in the sprawling market, perhaps in the section designated for northern traders, or maybe you negotiate access to a more central area depending on your status and connections. Setting up is an operation in itself, hauling heavy bales, arranging them to look appealing, and trying to keep them secure in the chaotic environment. You are constantly surrounded by potential buyers, curious onlookers, and unfortunately, plenty of people who would happily relieve you of your goods or your silver if you weren't careful. The market is a sensory overload. The smells are intense. Spices you've never encountered, roasting meats, the scent of animals, the musk of unwashed bodies, and beneath it all, the earthy smell of the delta mud. The sounds are a constant drone, hundreds, maybe thousands, of conversations happening simultaneously in dozens of languages, punctuated by the calls of vendors, the bleating of animals, the clanging of metal, and the occasional burst of music or shouting. The The sights are just as overwhelming: vibrant textiles, glittering jewelry, strange fruits, exotic animals, and people of every complexion and dress imaginable. It's like someone took all the different kinds of people and things in the world and just shook them up in a giant bag right here on the Volga Delta. Your primary goal is to sell what you brought and buy silver. While other goods are available and valuable, silver dirhams are the main currency of the South, and they are what your people back home crave. You display your furs, letting prospective buyers feel their softness, check their quality. You might have a few slaves, perhaps young men or women captured on your journey or acquired through trade further north. These are valuable commodities, destined for the slave markets of the Caliphates or Byzantium. Negotiation is key, and it's done in a variety of ways. If you're lucky, you have someone in your crew who has picked up some Arabic or Persian, the lingua franca of the southern markets. More likely, you rely on interpreters, who are ubiquitous in ITIL's markets. These can be other foreign traders who speak multiple languages, or perhaps local people who have learned the necessary tongues. You haggle fiercely over prices, trying to get the best rate for your furs, measuring them by the bundle, or by quality. For slaves, the price depends on their age, health, and skills. It's a cold, hard business, reducing human beings to commodities, but it's a fundamental part of the trade route. The silver itself is traded by weight. You carry your own scales, small, portable balances that you guard jealously. Buyers bring their silver, usually in the form of dirham coins, thin, flat discs of silver with Arabic inscriptions. You carefully weigh the coins, checking their weight against known standards. But weighing isn't enough. You also need to check the purity of the silver. Counterfeiting and debasement were common problems. You might use a touchstone, scratching the coin against it and testing the streak with acid, or simply rely on your experience and the ring of the coin. Every gram of silver matters. It represents your profit, the reward for months of grueling travel. The Khazar authorities are ever present in the market, ensuring order, collecting taxes, and settling disputes. They levy significant tolls on the goods traded, a substantial portion of the value of what passes through ITIL. This is how the Khaganate maintains its wealth and power. You pay your dues, however reluctantly, understanding that resisting is futile. They also have rules about market conduct, weights and measures, and resolving disagreements between merchants from different communities. Remember that system of judges for different religions? That comes into play here. If you have a dispute with a Muslim merchant, you might have to go before the Muslim judge, and vice versa. It's a complex legal system, and navigating it adds another layer of stress to the trading process. A mainstream historical fact about trade in ITIL is the sheer volume of silver dirhams that flowed through the city. Archaeological finds across northern and eastern Europe, particularly in Scandinavia and the Baltic region, contain vast hoards of Arab silver coins, often dating from the 9th and 10th centuries, with many bearing mint marks from cities in the Abbasid and Samanid caliphates. ITIL and VOLGA were the primary funnels for this silver, exchanged for northern goods. It was the oil wealth of its day, driving economic development and political change far to the north. Life in the market is exhausting. You spend all day on your feet, talking, negotiating, weighing, and watching your back. The heat can be intense, especially in the warmer months, adding to the discomfort. At night you might retreat to your ship or a lodging house, guarding your remaining goods and the silver you've acquired. Sleep is precious, but the constant noise of the city and the anxiety of being in a foreign land can make it difficult. You dream of home, of quiet forests and familiar faces, a stark contrast to the vibrant, overwhelming reality of ITIL. A quirky tidbit about the Rus traders in ITIL comes from the accounts of Arab travelers. Some mention that the Rus would set up their own distinct market areas, often near the river, and that they had specific customs, like sacrificing animals, sometimes even human captives, according to some accounts, though this is debated and might be exaggeration, when they made a good profit, distributing some of the meat to the poor. They were seen as distinct, powerful, and sometimes rather shocking in their customs by the more settled, often Muslim, inhabitants of the city. Imagine trying to explain to your Khazar neighbor why you're sacrificing a chicken after selling a particularly nice batch of squirrel furs. Historians still argue about the exact degree of independence the Rus traders had within ITIL. Were they simply foreign merchants subject entirely to Khazar law and taxation, or did they maintain their own internal organization, perhaps even having their own representatives or leaders within the city who dealt with the Khazar authorities? The presence of distinct Rus quarters and burial sites in areas linked to the Khazar realm suggests they were more than just transient visitors, but the precise nature of their political and legal status within the Khaganate remains a subject of scholarly debate. You spend days, perhaps weeks, in ITIL, depending on how quickly you can trade your goods and acquire what you need. You see the wealth of the South firsthand, the luxury goods, the sophisticated crafts. You see the diversity of the people who converge here, a testament to the reach of the trade routes. Your ship gradually fills with silver, perhaps some rolls of silk, a few jars of spices, maybe some glass beads or fine metalwork that will fetch a good price back north. Each successful transaction is a step closer to completing your mission, a tangible measure of your success. The sun beats down, the market buzzes, and you continue the slow, deliberate process of turning northern resources into southern wealth, right here at the heart of the Khazar Empire. You've spent days, maybe weeks, immersed in the sensory whirlwind of ITIL's markets, the air thick with 1,000 foreign smells, the sounds a constant, multilingual drone. You've haggled over furs, weighed silver dirhams until your fingers were black with tarnish, and navigated the complex social dance of trading in a city where dozens of languages were spoken. But as you do business here, you start to realize that ITIL isn't just a destination, it's a crossroads. It's the place where the river highway you've traveled connects to other, even grander, arteries of the world. Look around you in the market. You see merchants who haven't just come down the Volga from the north. You see people whose skin is darker, whose clothes are made of fabrics you've never seen before, whose languages are completely alien. These are the traders from the south, from the vast, wealthy empires that lie beyond the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea. You see merchants from the lands of the Arab caliphates, from cities like Baghdad and Samarkand, who have traveled across deserts and mountains to bring their goods here. You see traders from the Byzantine Empire, from the legendary city of Miklagard, Constantinople, who have sailed across the Black Sea and up the rivers, or perhaps traveled overland. The goods they bring are astonishing. Bolts of silk, finer than anything produced in the north, in vibrant colors that seem to absorb the light. Jars of spices that fill the air with exotic aromas, pepper, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, things that can transform the simplest food into a feast, or be used in perfumes and medicines. Glassware, delicate and brightly colored, a stark contrast to the rough pottery of the north. Jewelry crafted with intricate designs and precious stones you've only seen on the wealthiest chieftains back home. Swords and armor made with techniques far more advanced than your own blacksmiths can manage. These are the luxuries of a richer, more sophisticated world, and ITIL is where they meet the raw materials of the north. Trading here isn't just about exchanging furs for silver. It's about connecting to this global network. The silver dirhams you're acquiring are the currency of the caliphates, minted in distant cities you can't even imagine. The silks you might buy are woven thousands of miles to the east. The spices come from lands even further away, at the edge of the world. You, the Viking merchant from a small harbor in the north, are directly plugged into a trade system that stretches from Scandinavia to Central Asia and from the Baltic to the Mediterranean. ITIL is the switchboard, the central point where all these different lines converge. It makes your home harbor feel like a puddle compared to the ocean of commerce you're swimming in now. It's like realizing your local corner shop is actually part of a global logistics network involving container ships and air freight. Mind-blowing, really? The presence of merchants from Byzantium and the Caliphates highlights the two main southern destinations for the goods flowing down the eastern rivers. The Dnieper route led to the Black Sea and Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, a vast Christian state that valued furs, slaves, and other northern products. The Volga route, the one you've taken, leads to the Caspian Sea, which provides access to the markets of the Arab caliphates, initially the Abbasids based in Baghdad, and later other Islamic dynasties like the Samanids in Central Asia. While there was some overlap and interaction between these two southern systems, ITIL was primarily the gateway to the Caspian and the Eastern Islamic world. A mainstream historical fact is that the vast majority of the silver coins found in Viking Age hoards in Scandinavia and Eastern Europe are Arab dirhams that traveled north via the Volga route. While Byzantine coins are also found, their quantity is significantly smaller than the flood of Islamic silver. This underscores the economic primacy of the Volga route and the markets of the Caspian Sea, particularly ITIL, as the main source of wealth for the northern traders during the peak of this trade. ITIL was the primary faucet for that sweet, sweet silver. Interacting with these southern merchants is another lesson in cultural difference. Their manners, their dress, their religious practices, their languages, it's all different. You might see Muslims praying in the market, facing towards a distant city called Mecca. You might see Christians with icons and crosses. You might see Jews observing their Sabbath. And you, a follower of the old gods, are just another thread in this rich tapestry. Communication requires patience and often relies on those multilingual interpreters who seem to glide through the market, bridging the gaps between Norse, Slavic, Bulgar Turkic, Arabic, Persian, and Greek. It's a constant effort, trying to understand and be understood, but it's necessary to make your deals. A quirky tidbit, again thanks to the observations of Arab travelers, is the way the Rus traders were sometimes perceived by the more settled southern populations. While they were valued for the goods they brought, their customs could be seen as rough, or even shocking. Accounts describe them as being loud, boisterous, and sometimes prone to excessive drinking and public displays that were considered uncouth by the standards of sophisticated urban centers like ITIL or Baghdad. Imagine trying to explain to a refined spice merchant from Isfahan why your crew is currently having a wrestling match in the middle of the street after a successful trade. Oh, them? That's just how we celebrate. It's, traditional. Historians still argue whether the Rus traders had direct, regular contact with major cities like Baghdad or Constantinople, or if they primarily traded through intermediaries like the Khazars and ITIL or Byzantine officials on the Black Sea. While some Rus individuals undoubtedly traveled further south, the bulk of the northern goods and southern silver likely changed hands at key hubs like ITIL, where different trade networks converged under the watchful eye of the local authorities. The picture is probably a mix of direct travel by a few and trade through middlemen for the many. As you spend time in ITIL, you hear stories about the lands to the south. Tales of cities with millions of people, of palaces covered in gold, of libraries filled with scrolls, of technologies you can barely comprehend. It makes your home, even the trading centers you know, seem small and provincial. You are seeing firsthand the wealth and power that exists in the world, and understanding why the silver flowing from it is so valuable. It changes your perspective, expanding your mental map of the world far beyond the fjords and forests of the north. You are not just a merchant, you are a link in a chain that spans continents. The work in ITIL is tiring, but it's also exhilarating in its own way. The sheer energy of the market, the thrill of the deal, the satisfaction of watching your pile of silver grow. You are constantly assessing the value of goods, the honesty of the people you deal with, the rules of this complex game. You are a long way from home, surrounded by the unfamiliar, but you are succeeding. You are turning the resources of the north into the wealth of the south, right here in the heart of the Khazar Khaganate. The sounds of the market, the buzz of commerce, the distant calls to prayer from the minarets, it all blends into a constant backdrop to your efforts, a reminder of where you are and how far you've come. You've seen the links to distant lands, touched the wealth of empires, and now, it's time to consolidate your gains and prepare for the long journey back. You've spent days navigating the labyrinthine markets of ITIL, the sheer volume of goods and people a constant, buzzing presence. But amidst the haggling over furs and the careful weighing of silver, something else begins to dawn on you, something that expands your understanding of the world far beyond the rivers you've traveled. You see the faces of people who have come from lands you've only heard whispered names of, lands impossibly far to the south and east. You see goods that could not possibly have originated anywhere near the forests and steppes you've traversed. You realize that ITIL is not just the end of the Volga. It's a knot in a much larger, much more intricate web of connections, a place where the threads of trade reach out to legendary empires and distant, fabled cities. Look at the silks displayed by that merchant with the dark, sun-weathered skin and the intricately wrapped turban. Those aren't woven by any loom you've ever seen. They are incredibly fine, with vibrant colors extracted from plants and insects unknown in the north. These fabrics come from the east, perhaps from lands like Persia or even further along the Silk Road, a network of routes stretching thousands of miles across deserts and mountains to places like Samarkand and Bokhara, and ultimately, perhaps, to the distant, mysterious land of Ceres, where silk is said to originate. Imagine the journey those bolts of cloth have made, carried on the backs of camels, loaded onto ships on inland seas, passing through countless hands and over innumerable borders, just to end up here, waiting to be traded for a bundle of your squirrel furs. It makes your trip down the Volga feel like a quick paddle across a pond. And the spices. The air in the market is thick with unfamiliar, intoxicating aromas, the sharp bite of pepper, the sweet warmth of cinnamon, the exotic scent of cloves. These spices don't grow in the north. They come from lands far, far to the south and east, from places like India and beyond. They are carried across oceans on ships, brought over land through deserts, changing hands multiple times, each step adding to their value, until they reach markets like ITIL. These aren't just flavorings for food, they are wealth, medicine, perfume, symbols of status and connection to a wider world. A small pouch of pepper might be worth more than a man's life back home. It's enough to make you sneeze just thinking about the logistics of getting them here. Then there are the people from Byzantium, from Miklagard. They arrive not just via the Dnieper route, which leads to the Black Sea and Constantinople, but also, sometimes, here to ITIL. Perhaps they travel overland, or perhaps they use a combination of routes that link the Black Sea to the Caspian. They bring goods from the Byzantine Empire, fine textiles woven with gold thread, intricate jewelry, glassware, icons, and perhaps even coins, although the Byzantine Miluresian isn't as common here as the Arab dirham. Their clothing is different, often more formal and elaborate than the rough wool and leather of the north. Their language is Greek, a complex tongue that sounds utterly alien. They represent a powerful, ancient Christian empire, a world of stone cities, libraries, and emperors who claim descent from Roman times. They are another endpoint for the goods you bring, another source of the wealth that fuels this trade. The silver itself is the most tangible link to these distant lands. You are trading for dirhams, coins minted in the workshops of the Arab caliphates. Look at the inscriptions on the coins. They are in Arabic, a script you cannot read, naming rulers and mints in cities like Baghdad, Wazit, or Samarkand. These coins represent the economic power of the Islamic world, a vast collection of empires and kingdoms stretching from Spain across North Africa and the Middle East into Central Asia. Their economies are based on agriculture, sophisticated crafts, and extensive trade networks, generating immense wealth that spills northwards in exchange for the raw materials the north provides. The sheer volume of silver flowing into ITIL is a testament to the insatiable southern demand for furs, slaves, and other northern goods, and the Islamic world's capacity to produce the silver to pay for them. This is the engine driving your entire journey, the reason you risked portages and raiders, the magnetic pull of southern silver. A mainstream historical fact, well documented by coin hoards across Scandinavia and Eastern Europe, is that the vast majority of the silver circulating in the north during the Viking Age came from the Arab caliphates via the Volga route, underscoring the economic dominance of this connection. You hear snippets of conversation, interpreted or guessed at, about the routes these southern merchants have taken. Tales of long voyages across the Caspian Sea, a vast inland ocean that connects ITIL to ports in Persia and Central Asia. Stories of caravans traveling across scorching deserts, facing sandstorms and bandits. Accounts of journeys up rivers you've never heard of, linking different parts of the Islamic world. It makes your journey down the Volga, challenging as it was, seem like just one spoke in a massive wheel of global commerce. A quirky tidbit that sometimes comes up in these markets, and is mentioned in some historical accounts, is the trade in specific, unusual goods. Besides the mainstays like furs and slaves, Northern traders might bring things like walrus ivory, highly prized for carvings, amber, used for jewelry and believed to have medicinal properties, or even falcons, which were sought after by southern elites for hunting. In return, they might acquire not just silver and silks, but also things like dates, dried fruits, or even glass beads produced in the south, which were sometimes used as currency or for decoration in the north. Imagine trading a magnificent white falcon you caught near the Arctic Circle for a string of brightly colored glass beads and a sack of dates. It highlights the incredible diversity and sometimes unexpected nature of the items exchanged across this vast network. The realization of these connections is both exciting and humbling. You are a small part of something immense, a single ship on one river connecting two vastly different worlds. ITIL is the point of contact, the place where your world of forests and fjords meets the world of deserts, empires, and ancient cities. It gives a new perspective on your efforts. You aren't just trading with locals, you are participating in a global economy. Historians still argue whether the knowledge of these distant lands and the routes to them was widespread among northern traders, or if it was confined to a relatively small group of experienced long-distance merchants who understood the complexities of the network. Were most traders simply going as far as VOLGA or ITIL and relying on intermediaries? Or did many undertake longer journeys themselves, venturing further south and east? The evidence suggests a mix, with some traders likely operating within specific segments of the route, while others, perhaps like yourself, aimed for the major hubs like ITIL to access the full range of southern goods and connect with merchants from across Eurasia. As you continue your trading in ITIL, these connections are everywhere. The weight of the silver in your hand, the feel of a silk garment, the scent of a spice, they are all tangible links to distant lands, proof of the incredible network that converges here. You are right at the heart of it, making your deals, securing your profit, and preparing for the long journey home, your mind now filled with the vastness of the world you have glimpsed from this incredible city at the mouth of the VOLGA. The relentless energy of ITIL's markets has begun to wind down for you. You've spent days, maybe weeks, immersed in the chaos, the noise, the incredible diversity of goods and people. You've haggled until your throat was sore, weighed silver until your hands were stained dark, and navigated the intricate dance of commerce in this global hub. Now, the trading is largely done. You've sold most of the furs, honey, wax, and the unfortunate human cargo you brought from the north. And in return, your ship is significantly heavier, not with bulky bales of animal hides, but with the concentrated weight of precious metal. This is the moment of truth, the point where you assess the success of your entire grueling journey. You gather your crew, find a secure spot, perhaps back on your ship, moored away from the busiest docks, or in a rented room with solid walls and a locked door, and you begin the meticulous process of counting your haul. The main prize, the reason for enduring months of hardship, is the silver. Piles of silver dirhams lie before you, hundreds, perhaps thousands, of thin, circular coins, each one a piece of wealth minted in a distant land by people whose names you can't even read. You count them, coin by coin, or weigh them in batches using your scales. The soft clinking sound of the silver is the most beautiful music you've heard in months. This isn't just money, it's stored value, portable wealth, something that can be melted down and crafted into jewelry, used to buy land, equip warriors, or simply provide security for your family back home. It's the culmination of your efforts, the tangible result of trading northern resources for southern riches. Remember those cold, damp nights huddled on the deck of your nar? Remember the aching muscles from rowing upstream, or the sheer terror of dragging your boat over rocky ground during the portage? This pile of silver is the reward for all of that. It's like getting your final paycheck after a really difficult project, except your paycheck is made of pure, shiny metal. Your profit isn't just the total weight of silver you've acquired. You have to factor in what you started with, any silver or goods you invested in the journey, and subtract the costs along the way, the tolls paid to the Khazars and other groups, the provisions consumed, perhaps the cost of repairing your ship, or even replacing crew members lost to illness, accident, or conflict. Calculating the true profit, the net gain after all expenses and risks, is a complex mental exercise. Was it worth it? Looking at the pile of silver right now, the answer is probably a resounding yes. But the memory of the hardships is still fresh, and the journey home is still ahead. Besides the silver, you might have acquired other goods. Maybe a few rolls of fine silk to sell for a high price back north, or perhaps as a gift for your chieftain or family. A jar of exotic spices, a piece of intricate jewelry, some fine glassware, or perhaps even a few slaves you purchased here, anticipating a good market for them further north or back home. These secondary goods add to your profit, but the silver is the heart of the matter. It's the most liquid form of wealth, the most universally desired commodity that flows up this river. A mainstream historical fact is that the average amount of silver found in Viking Age hoards in Scandinavia and Eastern Europe is quite substantial, often consisting of hundreds or even thousands of dirhams, along with hacked silver, pieces of silver jewelry or ingots cut up for weight. This indicates that successful trading voyages like the one you've undertaken could indeed bring back significant quantities of wealth, transforming the economies of the northern lands and contributing to the rise of powerful individuals and eventually kingdoms. Finding a hoard buried by a merchant who successfully returned from a trip like this is like finding their ancient bank account, showing just how profitable this trade could be. With your wealth secured, hopefully in sturdy boxes or bags that can be hidden and protected, you begin the process of preparing for the return journey. This involves reprovisioning the ship. You'll need food and water for the long trip back, which will be slower going upstream. You might buy dried meat, grain, or other staples available in ITIL's markets. You check your ship carefully for any damage sustained on the way down, patching any leaks, mending sails, replacing worn ropes. You need your nar to be in the best possible condition for the arduous journey ahead, which includes facing those portages again, this time against the slope you came down. The atmosphere among the crew might shift slightly. The anticipation of arriving in ITIL and making a profit is replaced by the anticipation, and perhaps dread, of the long trip home. The current will be against you almost the entire way. Those effortless drifts downstream will be replaced by relentless rowing and towing. Those portages that were brutal going downhill will be even worse going uphill. You'll be traveling with valuable cargo, making you a target once again, perhaps even more so now that you've successfully traded and are known to be carrying silver. It's like finishing a marathon and then being told you have to run it again, uphill, carrying a heavy backpack full of cash. A quirky tidbit about the return journey is that the routes taken might sometimes differ slightly from the routes south. While the main river systems were the same, traders might seek out alternative portages or tributaries on the way back, perhaps to find better conditions, avoid areas known for trouble, or access different trading partners. The knowledge of these alternative paths was valuable, passed down through experience and observation. It wasn't just one fixed road, it was a network of possibilities, each with its own challenges and advantages. Historians still argue about the exact methods used by merchants to protect their wealth during the return journey. Did they rely primarily on armed escorts, on traveling in larger groups, on secrecy and stealth, or on simply paying off potential threats? The sheer value of the silver being transported suggests that security was a major concern, and different strategies were likely employed depending on the specific dangers encountered along different stretches of the route. As you prepare to leave ITIL, you take one last look at the sprawling, vibrant city. It's a place unlike any other you've seen, a testament to the power of trade and the interconnectedness of the world. You've seen goods and people from distant empires, acquired wealth in a form that is transforming your own society, and survived the dangers of the journey. You are richer in silver, and perhaps also richer in experience and knowledge of the vast Eastern world. The ship is ready, the cargo is secured, and the long, difficult journey north awaits. The current of the VOLGA still flows past, but now it's an obstacle to be overcome, not a force that carries you effortlessly along. You are heading home, back towards the familiar, carrying the wealth of the South with you, a tangible link between your northern world and the distant, glittering empires you glimpsed from the markets of ITIL. You push off from the banks of ITIL, the massive, bustling city slowly receding behind you. The sounds of the market, the cries of the boatmen, the distant call to prayer, they all fade, replaced once again by the familiar creak of your ship and the slosh of water against the hull. But the water is different now. It's no longer carrying you effortlessly downstream, it's pushing against you, a constant, powerful force that you must now fight. The journey north has begun, and it will be, in many ways, even more challenging than the journey south. As your crew begins the grueling work of rowing against the current, or preparing ropes for the inevitable towing, your mind starts to process everything you've seen and experienced. The sheer scale of the journey hits you anew. You've traveled thousands of miles, across seas, up and down vast rivers, dragged your ship over land, navigated rapids, faced potential raiders, and dealt with rulers and merchants from across Eurasia. You started in a small harbor in the north, a place that now feels incredibly distant and perhaps even a little provincial, and you've reached a city that is a nexus of global trade, connecting Scandinavia to the Islamic world and Byzantium. The vastness of the world you've encountered settles in. You've seen landscapes change dramatically, from the dense forests of the north to the open steppes of the Khaganate, from the cold waters of the Baltic to the warm, salty tang that hinted at the Caspian Sea. You've met peoples with languages, customs, and religions utterly different from your own: Finnic hunters, Slavic farmers, Turkic warriors, Arab merchants, Persian traders, Byzantine officials, all converging in places like VOLGA and ITIL. Your mental map of the world has expanded exponentially, filled with names of cities and lands you'd only heard of in myth, now made real by the people and goods you encountered. Remember the portages? Yeah, they're coming back. And this time, you're hauling that heavily laden ship uphill towards the watershed divide. The silver you worked so hard to acquire in ITIL, the very symbol of your success, now adds considerable weight, making every step of the portage even more physically demanding. You might joke grimly with your crew about how much easier this would be if you just bought dates instead of silver, but the glint of the metal reassures you that the hardship is for a purpose. It's like carrying a backpack full of gold bricks up a mountain, terrible for your back, but great for your future. The return journey is a test of endurance and willpower. It's repetitive, demanding, and often monotonous. Days blur into weeks of rowing, towing, portaging, and navigating against the current. The scenery, which seemed new and exciting on the way down, is now familiar, but seen in reverse, like watching a long film backwards. You know the difficult stretches, the places where the current is strongest, the areas where raiders might lurk. You are better prepared this time, perhaps traveling with other ships for safety, relying on the experience gained on the journey south. The silver is a constant source of anxiety. You are carrying a fortune, a prize that many would kill for. Every rustle in the trees on the riverbank, every unfamiliar boat on the water, every encounter with local inhabitants, it all raises your guard. You sleep with one eye open, your hand near a weapon. The need for constant vigilance is exhausting, adding a mental drain to the physical strain of the upstream journey. A mainstream historical fact about the return journey is that it was often just as, if not more, dangerous than the trip south. While going downstream was faster, the ship was lighter and less valuable. Coming back upstream meant fighting the current, making slower progress, and carrying the highly desirable cargo of silver. This made the return trip a prime target for bandits and rival groups seeking to intercept the wealth flowing north. Many Viking Age hoards found buried along these routes are thought to represent merchants who hid their wealth when threatened, but were unfortunately never able to return to retrieve it. As you labor upstream, you have plenty of time to reflect on the people you met. The stern-faced Khazar officials, the bustling crowds in VOLGA, the diverse faces in ITIL's markets. You ponder their customs, their beliefs, their immense wealth and power. You realize that the world is not just your home and the lands you raid, it is a vast, interconnected network of societies, each with its own complexities and strengths. You have seen cities larger than anything in your homeland, witnessed levels of sophistication in crafts and organization that are astonishing. It changes your perspective on your own place in the world. A quirky tidbit about the journey home might be the things you bring back besides silver. Perhaps a pet monkey acquired in ITIL, causing chaos on the ship and confusing everyone back home. Or maybe some exotic fruit that quickly spoils but tasted amazing while it lasted. These small, tangible links to the distant south serve as conversation starters and proof of your incredible journey, even after the silver is melted down or spent. Oh, this old thing? Just a little something I picked up in the market, after I dragged my boat over a mountain. You wouldn't understand. Historians still argue about the long-term impact of these eastern trade routes on Scandinavian and Eastern European societies. Did the influx of silver primarily fuel raiding and warfare, providing the means to equip larger armies and build fortifications? Or did it primarily stimulate the growth of trade centers, encourage settlement, and contribute to the development of more complex political structures, eventually leading to the formation of kingdoms like Kiev and Rus? The truth is likely a mixture, but the wealth generated by this trade undeniably played a significant role in shaping the history of the region. Months pass. The seasons change. The warm air of the south gives way to the cooler temperatures of the north. The forests reappear, becoming denser, more familiar. The rivers narrow again. You fight your way through the portages, each one a brutal, unforgettable ordeal. You navigate the upstream stretches, the current a constant foe. You pass through the territories of the tribes you traded with on the way down, hoping for safe passage, perhaps trading some of your acquired goods for provisions or fresh furs for the final leg. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, you reach the familiar waters of Lake Ladoga, then the Neva, and at last, the Baltic Sea. The open water feels different now, less intimidating after the vastness of the Volga and the Caspian's distant pull. You sail towards the setting sun, towards home. The coastline becomes familiar, the shape of the hills, the scent of the land. And then you see it. The harbor. The long houses. The smoke rising from the hearths. You've made it back. Your ship, battered but whole, glides into the harbor, heavy with silver, a testament to the incredible journey you've completed. You step ashore, your legs unsteady after months on the water, your mind still reeling from the sights and sounds of ITIL. You are home, but you are changed. You have seen the world, or a significant part of it, connected by rivers and trade. The silver is your reward, but the knowledge, the experience, the understanding of the vastness of human civilization, that is a different kind of wealth, one that will stay with you long after the coins are spent. The journey is over. The ship is moored. The cargo is unloaded and secured. The sounds of the harbor are real again, replacing the echoes of the Volga and the markets of ITIL. The demands of home life await. But in the quiet moments, perhaps sitting by the fire on a long northern night, your mind will drift back to the great river, to the bustling cities, to the distant lands connected by silver and silk. You followed the Volga to the ends of the known world, and you returned, carrying the proof of that incredible, sleepy journey. As you settle down now, perhaps feeling the gentle tug of sleep after this long journey down the ancient river, let the sounds of the past fade away. The creak of the ship's timbers, the rush of the current, the distant hum of the market, let them soften, becoming just echoes in your mind. The work is done, the journey complete. You are safe now, drifting quietly, letting the stillness of the night settle around you. There are no more rapids to navigate, no more ships to drag, no more markets to haggle in. Just the quiet, the calm, the gentle easing into rest. Let the images of the vast river, the endless forests, the bustling cities, and the distant lands gently fade, like mist rising from the water at dawn. Breathe slowly, deeply. Feel the comfort of your bed, the stillness of the air. The journey is over. You are home. Sleep now. Sweet dreams.